Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Episode. Today we're continuing series Naomi Super Happy Fun Times because I couldn't think of a better title, and if you can't tell already, I'm playing Gun Survivor 2 Biohazard Code Veronica today. It's quite the mouthful of a title, so I'm just going to call it Code Veronica and you guys can fill in the rest. Now I'm not here to say this is a hidden gem game on the Naomi, it's actually relatively janky, but it's a very interesting and ambitious pivot on the Code Veronica and Resident Evil survival horror formula we had come to know and love to this point in time. Basically, it's a light gun-esque game, but you get free range of motion throughout all of the levels on the X and Y coordinate. Plays very similar to Taito's Gunbuster, except much more modern and in 3D. And this basically adheres to the entire story of Code Veronica, except it takes assets and turns it into an entire arcade experience. The only other game that really does this to my knowledge is the Half-Life arcade release on the Taito Type X, which again is definitely not as good as actual Half-Life, but it is a fun pivot. I love looking at games that try something new and unique, and Code Veronica here is definitely one of them. It's basically a first-person shooter, but every once in a while the camera will come into this third-person aspect, and that is because it seems like some of the level layout in actual Code Veronica was not conducive to having that first-person camera when you turn the corners. It's a lot of asset reuse, but if you like Code Veronica, it's a fun and new way to play, and seeing Resident Evil in first-person long before we would get the modern Resident Evil first-person games was really interesting in and of itself. And of course it's on the Naomi, so it has that classic Dreamcast look everyone knows and loves if they grew up with it. You even get the fun door transitions, because where would we be in a Resident Evil game without them? The goal of the game is quite simple. Shoot your way through a level until you get the key, go to the area that it unlocks, and fight a boss. Interestingly though, all of the doors are just open off the top outside of the key door. You can run by basically 80% of the enemies in this game, and that's going to be the most advisable thing because you get unlimited bullets in your handgun, but it is definitely one of the most weakest weapons in the game, and any other weapon with actual quantified ammo is going to be so much better for you to use. So the thing is, just run by the enemies, which is not a very good design choice decision. You should have to fight the enemies in an arcade game, that is why we're here, but in Code Veronica the best thing to do is just sprint. And I will say, of course, it's a Resident Evil game, so we get a very large spider. If you watch my channel, you know my dislike for that entire species, but getting to shoot him here isn't the worst thing in the world. It's one less spider in the world that we have to deal with, and that always makes me a very happy retro gamer. But Code Veronica on Naomi is just such an interesting concept. They wanted to extend the franchise of Resident Evil, and they wanted to get an arcade release out of it, so why not take the assets of a game you already have and pivot it to a very popular arcade genre, the light gun game. What I really wish they had done though is just made this a traditional true light gun game on rails where you didn't have any control of your character. From a design perspective, it does seem like it expands the light gun genre into doing something new, but from an actual gameplay perspective, it is a little bit difficult to navigate the worlds. And you'll see here as enemies get so close to you, you basically have to look down automatically, and missing shots is 100% a thing that's going to happen on you. So I wish that Capcom and Namco, the two co-developers of this game, had worked on a traditional light gun shooter. Recently I did a video on Silent Hill the arcade, which takes the franchise of Silent Hill and puts it into a traditional light gun game, and I do think that works so much better. But I'm not saying this isn't a fun game. Getting in a room with a cluster of zombies all running towards you, strafing left and right, and unloading your clip to try to put them all down to move on to the next room is a lot of fun. But the interesting thing, again, like I said, is we actually don't need to shoot any of these zombies to pass through. I'm doing it for the footage, but I could easily just run to that door and bypass everything in that room, and that's kind of the strange thing about this game. It is well designed from a gameplay perspective until you realize that you don't actually have to play 90% of the game to do anything. You'll see here, I'll just run by everything, go through a door, and I am on to the next area of the game. Sure, it's not as much fun, but it is a thing you can do. Every once in a while though, you do have to basically fight at least one enemy to get past to get the key here, but once you get that key you can book it out of the room and never deal with any of the enemies. So it is kind of a weird thing, but I just love playing this game, and at least it has a good soundtrack because it's a Resident Evil game, so go ahead and listen, and I'll be right back. Just classic spooky horror Resident Evil music there, and I will say that one of my favorite parts of the game are actually the boss battles. One, because you can't just run past them, but two, they actually give you something going on screen. I do like shambling zombies in my third-person survival horror, but in a light gun game like this, they don't really give you all that much. They stand in front of you and you just keep clicking the fire button until they go down. But with the boss enemies, you really need to worry about navigating the small room you're in, being able to get your angles on shots and going from there. And you will see that once you get a shotgun, it is much easier. Every single death you take, you will get that as a reward for putting in another credit, and you're definitely going to be feeding this thing a lot of credits because it is not an easy game, and with some of the camera angles, you're going to get attacked by zombies and monsters that you can't actually see on screen. But I'm willing to forgive Code Veronica a lot of these things because it has one of my favorite features in an arcade game, ambition. It's trying to do something new that really hadn't been done all that much before. Now, more often than not, when somebody tries something new, it does come with mixed results, and you'll see right there again, why shoot at the enemy when you can just run right past it? Sure, there is a score in this game, but it really doesn't affect all that much of anything if I'm being entirely honest with you. But I do love that they tried to do something new and unique with the Resident Evil formula, because we've obviously had Resident Evil for a very long time, and even by the time Code Veronica came out, the formula was probably ready for a pivot. Now, Gun Survivor isn't the most successful version of that. I would say that moving Resident Evil into first person with Resident Evil 7 and beyond was the better move, and sometimes the game can be a little bit stupid and enemies will just get stuck on nothing, but you can tell that they had a good idea here, and I would love to see this tried again in arcades, because now we do have a full first person Resident Evil universe to explore around. Give me Resident Evil Village, let me play that as a first-person shooter light gun game, give it to me in VR as well, since we already have 8 in VR, and I would be a very, very happy Resident Evil fan. And I will say that there is a decent amount of strategy to this game in the boss battles as well. Off the top here, you're going to see we have 2 other enemies to eliminate, but this boss is sending out all of these different gas plumes. What you need to understand is, just like a shmup, a lot of the enemy attacks are pattern-based. If you stand directly in front of the boss when they let off that gas, you're 100% invulnerable. It's never going to get towards you and hit you. So once you actually understand the boss patterns, it becomes a little bit more fun and a little bit more interesting to play around with. There's definitely places where you are invincible, and once you find them, you feel like you're actually getting better at the game, even though the game has been kicking your ass the entire time you have been playing it. But you do get story as well, and weirdly, they never recorded any of the dialogue. It just happens in these little text boxes down below, and it basically makes it feel like a budget game, which I'm sure this was. You take the assets of Code Veronica, you remix them into a new game, but you don't do any voice acting. You basically get an arcade release with not a lot of effort and not a lot of money put in, but when you have a base game as good as something like Code Veronica, it's actually something that's acceptable to me because it's still going to be fun. I do wish we had some voice lines though, definitely would help out, and you are going to see some boss asset reuse later in the game, but that's so common in arcade games and gaming in general. Really can't fault Capcom for that because everyone else does it too. But I'm going to give you one more example of the soundtrack, as well as the weirdness of having no voiceover whatsoever. Watch this next clip and see how uncanny valley it seems, and I'll be right back with a little more history of the game. It just seems so weird to watch those in-engine cutscenes where you see mouths moving, but there's no voice coming out of it, and you just get the most rudimentary writing ever. I get it, it's not a console release, so Capcom probably wanted to move this out quickly, but it still feels a little bit strange, and that's exactly the thing about Gun Survivor. It all just feels slightly strange. You're not quite sure where they came up with this game whatsoever, but you enjoy playing it all the same, and that's what I mean when I say ambition in a video game. When developers try to do something new, I just love it, because until the point in time that I had played this, I'd never really seen it done anywhere else other than Gunbuster from Taito, and if you've never played that game before, definitely check it out. If I remember, I'll leave a link in the description below. But of course, you have to have one big last boss battle in the game, and I will say this is where the developers 100% wanted to make sure the arcade operators made their money, because you are just going to get absolutely decimated here the entire time you were fighting. The pattern here is basically unreadable, and there's some attacks that you can just not get away from based upon your movement speed versus the movement speed of your opponent. But honestly, since we're not using real quarters, it doesn't really matter. But this game is just unique. That's their main takeaway. There's so many games on the Naomi that are technically better than this, but there's very few games on Naomi that are as unique as this title, and I wanted to talk about the Naomi and some of my favorite games on it. This definitely popped into my head very quickly because it's one of those titles, if you've ever seen it in arcades, you were just enthralled by it, you wanted to check it out based upon the unique control scheme and the fact that it had something to do with Resident Evil. And I do wish we would see another release in this franchise with some more modern hardware. This would be absolutely perfect in VR. Just give us an arcade Resident Evil game, Capcom, and put it in a VR headset. I will buy 2 copies day one just to help you guys out. But of course, there is more Naomi fun to be had, but if you've never checked this game out, it works perfectly on Demule or Flycast. You can experience it today, and I definitely recommend you do so. But tell me down below if you've ever seen a cabinet for this game. I would be curious, and I do know there is one at Galloping Ghost out about 45 minutes away from me, so I probably should drive out soon and give it another replay. But I love that there's a convenient fighter jet around the corner. Claire here can escape and go on to her next adventure, and I'm going to go hop in my fighter jet and take off. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.